Hello everyone, I have something special to share with you. I was sent this beautiful book by a subscriber named Lusa, and she would like for me to read from The Complete Tales of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. So, let's begin. Here's the map of Beatrix Potter's world. I remember this so well. Isn't that pretty? Oh my, brings back lots of memories. Here's about the author, Beatrix Potter, written in 1902. About this book, the story of naughty Peter Rabbit in Mr. McGregor's garden first appeared in a picture letter Beatrix wrote to Noel Moore, the young son of her former governess, in 1893. Encouraged by her success in having some greeting cards designs published, Beatrix remembered the letter 7 years later and expanded it into a little picture book with black and white illustrations. It was rejected by several publishers, so Beatrix had it printed herself to give to family and friends. And about this time, Frederick Warne agreed to publish the tale if the author would supply color pictures, and the book finally appeared in 1902, priced at 1 shilling. It was an instant success and has remained so ever since. It has a pacey story with an engaging hero, an exciting chase and happy ending matched with exquisite illustrations, and the result is a children's classic whose appeal is ageless. I think so. And I'm about to read to you the story of Peter Rabbit, the tale of Peter Rabbit. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. That's right there. "Now, my dear," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there, and he was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Doom, doom, doom. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I am going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail were good little bunnies who went down to the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Chasing after him. Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have got away altogether if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Oh, I remember looking at this picture when I was little and feeling so sad and scared for Peter Rabbit. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears. But his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him, and rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Presently, Peter sneezed. Kerchoo! Mr. McGregor was after him in no time, and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Wow, he got away just in time. That was scary. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little bunny rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him, and Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. I suppose some cats chase rabbits. My cats don't. Okay. He went towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scritch, scratch, scratch, scritch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes. But presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could along a straight walk behind some black currant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him till he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking, and she wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I think Peter Rabbit is quite an adventurer. I am sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter, 1 tablespoonful to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. The end. Oh, look at, there's Peter in bed way back there. Cute. How cute is that? These are some beautiful drawings. So, this is the only story that I have ever heard by Beatrix Potter was Peter Cottontail. I didn't know that she had other critters in her stories. There's more rabbits here. Benjamin Bunny. But I never saw one about the tale of Squirrel Nutkin. Let's read The Tale of Squirrel Nutkin. That one was written in 1903. I see in each book it describes where Beatrix Potter was. That's why the map. This is where she was when she wrote each book. I guess she went to a lot of places. She was spending the summer with her family in Lingholm when she wrote this one. Okay, The Tale of Squirrel Nutkin. This is a tale about a tale that belonged to a little red squirrel, and his name was Nutkin. He had a brother called Tinkleberry and a great many cousins, and they lived in a wood at the edge of a lake. In the middle of the lake there is an island covered with trees and nut bushes, and among those trees stands a hollow oak tree, which is the house of an owl who was called Old Brown. Old Brown is the name of the owl. One autumn, when the nuts were ripe and the leaves on the hazel bushes were golden and green, Nutkin and Tinkleberry and all the other little squirrels came out of the wood and down to the edge of the lake. They made little rafts out of twigs, and they paddled away over the water to Owl Island to gather nuts. Each squirrel had a little sack and a large oar and spread out his tail for a sail. It's cute. They also took with them an offering of 3 fat mice as a present for Old Brown and put them down upon his doorstep. Then Tinkleberry and the other little squirrels each made a low bow and said politely, Old Mr. Brown, will you favor us with permission to gather nuts upon your island? But Nutkin was excessively impertinent in his matters. He bobbed up and down like a little red cherry, singing, riddle me, rot, tot, tote, a little wee man in a red coat, a staff in his hand and a stone in his throat. If you'll tell me this riddle, I'll give you a groat. Now, this riddle is as old as the hills. Mr. Brown paid no attention whatever to Nutkin. He shut his eyes obstinately and went to sleep. The squirrels filled their little sacks with nuts and sailed away home in the evening. Such pretty drawings. But the next morning they all came back again to Owl Island, and Twinkleberry and the others brought a fine fat mole and laid it on the stone in front of Old Brown's doorway and said, Mr. Brown, will you favor us with your gracious permission to gather some more nuts? But Nutkin, who had no respect, began to dance up and down, tickling old Mr. Brown with a nettle and singing, Old Mr. B, riddle me ree, hitty-pitty within the wall, hitty-pitty without the wall. If you touch hitty-pitty will bite you. Mr. Brown woke up suddenly and carried the mole into his house. Those rhymes don't really make much sense. He shut the door in Nutkin's face. Presently a little thread of blue smoke from a wood fire came up from the top of the tree, and Nutkin peeped through the keyhole and sang, A house full, a hole full, and you cannot gather a bowl full. Sounds like he's really trying to get on the owl's nerves. The squirrels searched for nuts all over the island and filled their little sacks, but Nutkin gathered oak apples, yellow and scarlet, and sat upon a beech stump playing marbles and watching the door of old Mr. Brown. On the third day, the squirrels got up early and went fishing. They caught 7 fat minnows as a present for old Mr. Brown. They paddled over the lake and landed under a crooked chestnut tree on Owl Island. Twinkleberry and 6 other little squirrels each carried a fat minnow, but Nutkin, who had no nice manners, brought no present at all. He ran in front singing, The man in the wilderness said to me, How many strawberries grow in the sea? I answered him as I thought good, As many red herrings as grow in the wood. But old Mr. Brown took no interest in riddles, not even when the answer was provided for him. That is funny. I think that Nutkin would really get on my nerves too, I think. As cute as he is. On the 4th day, the squirrels brought a present of 6 fat beetles, which were as good as plums in plum pudding for old Mr. Brown. Each beetle was wrapped up carefully in a dock leaf, fastened with a pine needle pin. But Nutkin sang as rudely as ever. Old Mr. B, riddle me ree, flower of England, fruit of Spain, met together in a shower of rain, put in a bag tied round with a string. If you'll tell me this riddle, I'll give you a ring. Which was ridiculous of Nutkin, because he had not got any ring to give to old Mr. Brown. The other squirrels hunted up and down the nut bushes, but Nutkin gathered robin's pincushions off of a briar bush and stuck them full of pine needle pins. How cute. These are such cute pictures. On the 5th day, the squirrels brought a present of wild honey. It was so sweet and sticky that they licked their fingers as they put it down upon the stone. They had stolen it out of a bumblebee's nest of the tippity top of the hill. But Nutkin skipped up and down singing, hum a hum, buzz buzz, hum a hum, buzz buzz, hum a bum, buzz, hum a bum buzz, hum a bum, buzz buzz, hum a bum buzz. That's how it goes. As I went over Tippletine, I met a flock of bonny swine, some yellow-nacked, some yellow-backed. They were the bonniest swine that e'er went over Tippletine. Old Mr. Brown turned up his eyes in disgust at the impertinence of Nutkin, but he ate up the honey. The squirrels filled their little sacks with nuts, but Nutkin sat upon a big flat rock and played 9 pins with a crab apple and green fir cones. On the 6th day, which was Saturday, the squirrels came again for the last time, and they brought a new-laid egg in a little rush basket as a last parting present for old Mr. Brown. But Nutkin ran in front, laughing and shouting, Humpty Dumpty lies in the beck with a white counterpane round his neck. 40 doctors and 40 rights cannot put Humpty Dumpty to rights. Now old Mr. Brown, he took an interest in eggs. He opened one eye and shut it again, but still he did not speak. Nutkin became more and more impertinent. Old Mr. B, hickamore hackamore on the king's kitchen door. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't drive a hickamore hackamore off the king's kitchen door. Nutkin danced up and down like a sunbeam, but still old Mr. Brown said nothing at all. Nutkin began again. Arthur O'Barrow has broken his band. He's come roaring up the land. The King of Scots with all his power cannot turn Arthur of the Bower. Nutkin made a whirring noise to sound like the wind, and he took a running jump onto the head of Old Brown. Then all at once there was a flutterment and a scufflement and a loud squeak. The other squirrels scuttered away into the bushes, and when they came back, very cautiously peeping around the tree, there was old Mr. Brown sitting on the doorstep, quite still with his eyes closed, as if nothing happened. But Nutkin was in his waistcoat pocket. This looks like the end of the story, but it isn't. Old Mr. Brown carried Nutkin into his house and held him up by the tail, intending to skin him. But Nutkin pulled so very hard that his tail broke in two, and he dashed up the staircase and escaped out of the attic window. Whew. Well, Nutkin was sure asking for trouble, wasn't he? Here's the end of the story. And to this day, if you meet Nutkin up a tree and ask him a riddle, he will throw sticks at you and stamp his feet and scold and shout, "Cuck-cuck-cuck-cuck-cur, cuck." Cuck-cuck-cuck-cur, cuck. I guess that's the sound of a squirrel trying to warn you away. And look, he's got no more tail there. He's like, oh, that is so cute. That is so cute. The end. The Tale of Peter Rabbit was the first one that she wrote, because it goes year by year. Now we have The Tale of Gloucester, 1903. Tale of Gloucester was Beatrix Potter's own favorite among all her books. Okay. In the time of swords and periwigs and full-skirted coats with flowered lappets, when gentlemen wore ruffles and gold-laced waistcoats of paduasoy and taffeta, there lived a tailor in Gloucester. He sat in the window of a little shop in Westgate Street, cross-legged on a table, from morning till dark. All day long, while the light lasted, he sewed and snippeted, piecing out his satin and pompadour and lute strings. Stuffs had strange names and were very expensive in the days of the tailor of Gloucester. But although he sewed fine silk for his neighbors, he himself was very, very poor. A little old man in spectacles with a pinched face, old crooked fingers, and a suit of threadbare clothes. He cut his coats without waste, according to his embroidered cloth. They were very small ends and snippets that lay about upon the table. 2 narrow breadths for naught, except waistcoats for mice, said the tailor. One bitter cold day near Christmas time, the tailor began to make a coat of cherry-colored corded silk embroidered with pansies and roses, and a cream-colored satin waistcoat trimmed with gauze and green worsted chenille for the mayor of Gloucester. That sounds fancy. The tailor worked and worked, and he talked to himself. He measured the silk and turned it round and trimmed it into shape with his shears. The table was all littered with cherry-colored snippets. No breadth at all, and cut on the cross, it is no breadth at all, tippets for mice and ribbons for mobs for mice, said the tailor of Gloucester. When the snowflakes came down against the small leaded window panes and shut out the light, the tailor had done his day's work. All the silk and satin lay cut out upon the table. There were 12 pieces for the coat and 4 pieces for the waistcoat, and there were pocket flaps and cuffs and buttons all in order. For the lining of the coat there was fine yellow taffeta, and for the buttonholes of the waistcoat there was a cherry-colored twist, and everything was ready to sew together in the morning, all measured and sufficient, except that there was wanting just one single skein of cherry-colored twisted silk. The tailor came out of his shop at dark, for he did not sleep there at night. He fastened the window and locked the door and took away the key. No one lived there at night but little brown mice, and they run in and out without any keys. For behind the wooden wainscot of all the old houses in Gloucester there are little mouse staircases and secret trapdoors, and the mice run from house to house through those long narrow passages. They can run all over the town without going into the streets. But the tailor came out of his shop and shuffled home through the snow. He lived quite nearby in College Court, next the doorway to College Green, and although it was not a big house, the tailor was so poor he only rented the kitchen. He lived alone with his cat. It was called Simpkin. Now, all day while the tailor was out at work, Simpkin kept house by himself, and he also was fond of the mice, though he gave them no satin for coats. "Meow," said the cat when the tailor opened the door. "Meow." The tailor replied, "Simpkin, we shall make our fortune, but I am worn to a ravelling. Take this groat, which is our last 4pence, and Simpkin, take a china pipkin, buy a pennyworth of bread, a pennorth of milk, and pennorth of sausages." I said pennyworth, but it's pennorth. Pennorth of sausages. So he's sending his cat to buy things for him. That's unusual. And oh, Simpkin, with the last penny of our 4pence. Buy me 1 penn'orth of cherry-colored silk. But do not lose the last penny of the 4pence, Simpkin, or I am undone and worn to a thread paper, for I have no more twist. Then Simpkin again said, "Meow," and took the groat and the pipkin, and went out into the dark. The tailor was very tired and beginning to be ill. He sat down by the hearth and talked to himself about that wonderful coat. "I shall make my fortune to be cut bias. The mayor of Gloucester is to be married on Christmas Day in the morning, and he hath ordered a coat and an embroidered waistcoat to be lined with yellow taffeta, and the taffeta sufficeth. There is no more leftovers and snippets than will serve to make tippets for mice." Then the tailor started, for suddenly, interrupting him from the dresser at the other side of the kitchen, came a number of little noises. Tip-tap, 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 tip. "Now, what can that be?" said the tailor of Gloucester, jumping up from his chair. The dresser was covered with crockery and pipkins, willow pattern plates and teacups and mugs. You can see that. The tailor crossed the kitchen and stood quite still beside the dresser, listening and peering through his spectacles. Again, from under a teacup came those funny little noises. Tip-tap, 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 tip. "This is very peculiar," said the tailor of Gloucester, and he lifted up the teacup, which was upside down. Out stepped a little lively lady mouse and made a curtsy to the tailor. Then she hopped away down off the dresser and under the wainscot. The tailor sat down again by the fire, warming his poor cold hands and mumbling to himself. "The waistcoat is cut from peach-colored satin, tambour, stitch, and rosebuds in beautiful floss silk. Was I wise to entrust my last 4pence to Simpkin? 1 buttonholes of cherry-colored twist." But all at once from the dresser there came other little noises. Tip-tap, 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 tip. "This is passing extraordinary," said the tailor of Gloucester, and turned over another teacup, which was upside down. Out stepped a little gentleman mouse and made a bow to the tailor. I bet you the kitty put them under that. And then from all over the dresser came a chorus of little tappings, all sounding together and answering one another like watch beetles in an old worm-eaten window shutter. Tip-tap, 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 tip. And out from under the teacups and from under bowls and basins stepped other and more little mice, who hopped away down off the dresser and under the wainscot. The tailor sat down close over the fire, lamenting, 1 buttonholes of cherry-colored silk, to be finished by noon of Saturday, and this is Tuesday evening. Was it right to let loose those mice? Undoubtedly the property of Simpkin. Alack, I am undone, for I have no more twist." The little mice came out again and listened to the tailor. They took notice of the pattern of that wonderful coat, and they whispered to one another about the taffeta lining and about little mouse tippets. And then all at once they all ran together down the passage behind the waistcoat, squeaking and calling to one another as they ran from house to house, and not one mouse was left in the tailor's kitchen when Simpkin came back with the pipkin of milk. Simpkin opened the door and bounced in with an angry grrr, meow, like a cat that is vexed, for he hated the snow, and there was snow in his ears and snow in his collar at the back of his neck. He put down the loaf and the sausages upon the dresser and sniffed. "Simpkin," said the tailor, "where is my twist?" But Simpkin set down the pipkin of milk upon the dresser and looked suspiciously at the teacups. he wanted his supper of little fat mouse. "Simpkin," said the tailor, "where is my twist?" But Simpkin had hid a little parcel privately in the teapot and spit and growled at the tailor. And if Simpkin had been able to walk, he would have asked, "Where is my mouse?" "Alack, I am undone," said the tailor of Gloucester, and went sadly to bed. All that night long Simpkin hunted and searched through the kitchen, peeping into cupboards and under the wainscot, and into the teapot where he had hidden that twist. But still he found never a mouse. Whenever the tailor muttered and talked in his sleep, Simpkin said, "Meow, gross," and made horrid noises as cats do at night. For the poor old tailor was very ill with a fever, tossing and turning in his four-poster bed, and still in his dreams he mumbled, "No more twist, no more twist." All that day he was ill, and the next day, and the next. And what should become of the cherry-colored coat? In the tailor's shop in Westgate Street, the embroidered silk and satin lay cut out upon the table, 1 in 20 buttonholes, and who should come to sew them when the window was barred and the door was fast locked? But that does not hinder the little brown mice. They run in and out without any keys through all the old houses in Gloucester. Out of doors, the market folks went trudging through the snow to buy their geese and turkeys and to bake their Christmas pies. There would be no Christmas dinner for Simpkin and the poor old tailor of Gloucester. The tailor lay ill for 3 days and nights, and then it was Christmas Eve. And very late at night, the moon climbed up over the roofs and chimneys and looked down over the gateway into College Court. There were no lights in the windows, nor any sound in the houses. All the city of Gloucester was fast asleep under the snow, and still Simpkin wanted his mice, and he mewed as he stood beside the four-post bed. But it is in the old story that all the beasts can talk. In the night between Christmas Eve and Christmas Day in the morning, though there are very few folk that can hear them or know what it is that they say, when the cathedral clock struck 12, there was an answer, like an echo of the chimes, and Simpkin heard it, and came out of the tailor's door and wandered about in the snow. From all the roofs and gables and old wooden houses in Gloucester came 1,000 merry voices singing the old Christmas rhymes, all the old songs that ever I have heard of, and some that I don't know, like Whittington's bells. First and loudest the cocks cried out, "Dame, get up and bake your pies." "Oh, dilly, dilly, dilly," sighed Simpkin. And now in a garret there were lights and sounds of dancing, and cats came from over the way. "Hey, diddle, diddle, the cat and the fiddle, all the cats in Gloucester except me," said Simpkin. Under the wooden eaves, the starlings and sparrows sang of Christmas pies. The jackdaws woke up in the cathedral tower. And although it was the middle of the night and the throstles and robins sang, the air was quite full of little twittering tunes. But it was all rather provoking to poor hungry Simpkin. Particularly he was vexed with some little shrill voices from behind a wooden lattice. I think they were bats, because they always have very small voices, especially in a black frost, when they talk in their sleep like the tailor of Gloucester. They said something mysterious that sounded like, "Buzz, quoth the blue fly, hum, quoth the bee, buzz and hum they cry, and so do we." And Simpkin went away shaking his ears as if he had a bee in his bonnet. From the tailor's shop in Westgate came a glow of light, and when Simpkin crept up to peep in at the window, it was full of candles. There was a snippeting of scissors and snappeting of thread, and little mouse voices sang loudly and gaily. 4 and 20 tailors went to catch a snail. The best man amongst them durst not touch her tail. She put out her horns like a little Kylo cow. Run, tailors, run, or she'll have you all in now. Then, without a pause, little mouse's voices went on again. Sieve my lady's oatmeal, grind my lady's flour, put it in a chestnut, let it stand an hour. Meow, meow, interrupted Simpkin, and he scratched at the door. But the key was under the tailor's pillow. He could not get in. The little mice sat down to spin. Pussy passed by and she peeped in. What are you at, my fine little men, making coats for gentlemen? Shall I come in and cut off your threads? Oh no, Miss Pussy, you'd bite off our heads. Mew, mew, cried Simpkin. Hey, diddly dinkety, answered the little mice. Hey, diddly dinkety poppity pat, the merchants of London, they wear scarlet, silk in the collar and gold in the hem, so merrily march the merchant men. They clicked their thimbles to mark the time, but none of the songs pleased Simpkin. He sniffed and mewed at the door of the shop. And then I bought a pipkin and a popkin and a slipkin and a slopkin, all for 1 farthing. It's so funny, the mice saying such funny things. And upon the kitchen dresser added the rude little mice. Mew. Scratch, scratch, scuffled Simpkin on the windowsill, while the little mice inside sprang to their feet and all began to shout at once in little twittering voices. No more twist, no more twist. And they barred up the window shutters and shut out Simpkin. But still through the nicks in the shutters he could hear the click of thimbles and little mouse voices singing. No more twist, no more twist. Simpkin came away from the shop and went home, considering in his mind. He found the poor old tailor without fever, sleeping peacefully. Then Simpkin went on tiptoe and took a little parcel of silk out of the teapot and looked at it in the moonlight, and he felt quite ashamed of his badness compared with those good little mice. When the tailor awoke in the morning, the first thing he saw upon the patchwork quilt was a skein of cherry-colored twist silk, and beside his bed stood the repentant Simpkin. Alack, I am worn to a ravelling, said the tailor of Gloucester, but I have my twist. The sun was shining on the snow when the tailor got up and dressed and came out into the street with Simpkin running behind him. The starlings whistled on the chimney stacks, and the throstles and robins sang, but they sang their own little noises, not the words they had sung in the night. Alack, said the tailor, I have my twist, but no more strength, nor time. Then will serve to make me 1 single buttonhole, for this is Christmas Day in the morning. The mayor of Gloucester shall be married by noon, and where is his cherry-colored coat? He unlocked the door of the little shop in Westgate Street, and Simpkin ran in like a cat that expects something. But there was no one there, not even 1 little brown mouse. The boards were swept and clean. The little ends of thread and the little silk snippets were all tidied away and gone from off the floor. But on the table, oh joy, Tailor gave a shout. There, where he had left plain cuttings of silk, there lay the most beautifulest coat, an embroidered satin waistcoat that had ever been worn by a mayor of Gloucester. There were roses and pansies upon the facings of the coat, and the waistcoat was worked with poppies and cornflowers. Everything was finished except just one single cherry-colored buttonhole, and where that buttonhole was wanting, there was pinned a scrap of paper with these words in little teeny weeny writing: "No more twist." And from then began the luck of the tailor of Gloucester. He grew quite stout, and he grew quite rich. He made the most wonderful waistcoats for all the rich merchants of Gloucester, and for all the fine gentlemen of the country round. Never were seen such ruffles or such embroidered cuffs and lappets, but his buttonholes were the greatest triumph of all. The stitches of those buttonholes were so neat, so neat. I wondered how they could be stitched by an old man in spectacles with crooked old fingers and a tailor's thimble. The stitches of those little buttonholes were so small, they looked as if they had been made by little mice. The end. Oh, sweet, sweet. Next time we'll read the tale of Benjamin Bunny. Thank you for joining me. Sleep well, my friends, and I'll see you in the next